Yes, that is my comment below, but I wanted to explain the acronyms that are used. I'll expand on them because I know that when I'm interpreting and I hear acronyms come up, I get really irritated because I want to know what they mean. So I'm going to do that for all of you. When we are discussing different signing systems, it's important to remember the history of the oppression of the deaf community. Long ago, ASL was banned. Not just ASL, worldwide, sign languages were banned. And instead, educators opted to teach deaf people how to speak using English systems or their country's language systems. But we're focusing on ASL, so we're focusing on English signing systems in order to teach deaf people how to understand and speak English. That philosophy of setting aside American Sign Language in favor of English systems led to the development of a lot of different signing systems. For example, the Rochester method, which meant that you finger spelled every single word, which was awful. C has two, C1 and C2. In C1, you would break down words into their sound components. For example, butterfly would become butter and fly. You would separate them. In C2, you would add words like the, is, endings like ing. You would add every single word that is being said. It would have a sign. In ASL, we don't have the verb to be. It's implied. But in C2, you would include that verb. PSE, which means Pidgin Signed English, uses ASL signs, but in English word order. When people are using SIMCOM, simultaneous communication, they're using PSE. So all of those are under the umbrella term MCE, Manual Coded English Systems. They're not languages. They're based on how to teach English and teaching deaf people how to speak. Whereas ASL is its own language because it has a separate grammatical structure. It has its own syntax. It's separate than English. It doesn't follow English's structure. They're different. Now, ASL doesn't have a sign for everything, just like English doesn't have a word for anything, or other spoken languages don't have words for everything. So in that case, what do? You borrow words. They can be loan signs, they're spelled, or loan words. They can be borrowed from another sign language. For example, the sign for sushi, which looks like this, sushi or sushi, it's not an ASL sign. It's not created in our language, but it is a Japanese one because it's part of their culture. And so it's been borrowed from them. Just like in English, you would say sushi, but it's not an English word, it's a Japanese word. In sign language interpreting, if a deaf person has an exact word that they want an interpreter to use, what they'll do is they'll use the sign for that word, but they'll add the English word on their mouth. So that as the interpreter, when I catch that, I know that there's a specific word that they want me to voice as opposed to having a choice if there is one. Or they'll sign the word they'll fingerspell the word instead of using the sign. And I know that that's the word that I'm to voice for them. Also, in families where they don't have knowledge of ASL or English systems of signing, but they need to communicate within their family home, they might develop what's called home signs. My dad was born deaf. He grew up as a deaf man. And they used home signs like this. If he liked something, he would do this. And if he didn't like something, he would do this. This doesn't have any meaning outside of their home. But in their home, my grandparents would recognize that it meant he wasn't happy about something. And so that's an example of a home sign. Temporary signs are if, for example, I'm interpreting in an educational capacity, like higher level education, college or university, that has a lot of heady terminology. Every time certain words come up, having to fingerspell it can be tedious. And so with the deaf consumer's involvement, we will discuss how we want to refer to that word in this context, in their program with them alone. outside, it wouldn't be the sign for it, but between us, we have an understanding of the meaning because it's a shorthand for interpreting. And it also helps deaf individuals with fatigue all day, having to watch finger spellings. It's a temporary sign.